My name is Emily Hartman. I am 34 years old and the proud owner of a modest vintage gallery nestled in the Pearl District of Portland, Oregon. To most outsiders, my life might appear unremarkable. I dress in faded cardigans, drive a 15-year-old Honda Civic, and spend my days meticulously restoring items many would dismiss as junk. But to my family, I have long been the disappointment, a single woman without children, lacking a prestigious career or the Ivy League credentials they hold in such high esteem. My father, Mr. Hartman, once managed a regional insurance office and measured a person's worth by their financial success. My mother, Carol, an elementary school principal, believed that true achievement stemmed from attending the right school, marrying the right partner, and pursuing the right career. Their pride and joy has always been my brother, Daniel. A Yale graduate, now a corporate lawyer in New York, Daniel married a pediatric cardiologist, and together they send their twin daughters to private school where they began learning Mandarin before the 2nd grade. Their holiday cards resemble glossy magazine spreads, perfect smiles, coordinated outfits, and curated joy. And then there's me. I studied cultural heritage at the University of Oregon. While Daniel stood in courtrooms, I worked in archives, researching antique finishes and identifying furniture styles from centuries past. Art is nice, my mother once remarked, but it doesn't pay the bills. I still remember her shoulders slumping as she read my college acceptance letter. After graduating, I spent 4 years as an assistant at an appraisal firm, developing a trained eye to distinguish true mahogany from veneer and authentic hardware from replicas. I once came home elated after discovering a lamp undervalued by $4,000. My father's only response, "Sounds risky." At 27, I invested my savings, along with a small loan from a former roommate, and opened a narrow storefront on Everett Street. I named it Hartman and Heritage, arranging each item with the reverence of a museum curator. On opening day, my mother brought a bouquet wrapped in plastic and whispered to my aunt, "Hopefully, she'll grow out of this by 30. From that moment on, I became a footnote at every family gathering. Each Christmas, Daniel was praised as the brilliant lawyer and exemplary father. I, on the other hand, was asked whether the shop was still open or if I'd considered substitute teaching. What they never realized was that each piece I restored and sold held a fragment of history, a fragment I helped bring back to life. A sterling Art Deco teapot once kept me awake all night, fearful I had misjudged its provenance. A 19th century music box I quietly sold brought a woman to tears when it played the same melody her grandmother had hummed in 1945. Where others saw tarnish, I saw stories. Still, their disregard wasn't the hardest part. It was the persistent sense that I would never measure up, that no matter how hard I worked, I would always be Emily, the odd one out. Unmarried, non-Ivy League, someone who left her mother with nothing impressive to share during weekend coffee circles. Eventually, I accepted my role on the sidelines. At least there, I was left alone. I never told anyone, not even my closest friend, that one of the first pieces I ever sold changed everything. It was a French mantel clock from the early 20th century, hidden in a storage unit just outside Portland. The owner wanted it gone, and I paid $45. After carefully removing grime, oiling the mechanisms, and researching the maker's faded mark, I discovered it had been custom-built by La Roy for a French diplomat under Napoleon III. 3 months later, it sold at auction in San Francisco for $52,000. I didn't spend a dime. Instead, I opened a private investment account under my business entity, separating my personal and professional finances. That sale opened my eyes. My work wasn't just sentimental, it could be financially powerful. I realized I didn't need my family's validation. What I needed was knowledge, discipline, and the ability to recognize value where others saw clutter. I began waking early on weekends, driving to estate sales across Oregon and Washington, particularly in aging neighborhoods and coastal towns. Many wealthy families in cities like Astoria and Tacoma lacked the expertise to properly value inherited heirlooms. Armed with a notebook and a portable scanner, I taught myself to identify authentic craftsmanship, real dovetail joints, original arts and crafts engravings, not modern imitations. One of my most memorable finds was in Seattle. An elderly couple was liquidating their father's library. Buried among dusty volumes, I discovered an 1837 woodblock print, annotated by a British historian who had chronicled the War of 1812. I purchased the entire box for $150. 6 months later, after authenticating the signature, I sold the print to a museum for $215,000. A few significant wins each year, combined with a steady stream of smaller, thoughtful sales, allowed my investment portfolio to grow quietly yet meaningfully. I maintained nothing under my own name. Instead, I established an LLC, Evergreen Holdings, through which I quietly acquired the building that housed my gallery. Not just the gallery itself, but also the 4 loft apartments above it, the adjacent office suite, and the small parking lot tucked behind the alley. Every deed, every asset, was held under Evergreen Holdings, an entity my family didn't even know existed. They continued to believe I was simply scraping by, keeping the gallery open as a quaint passion project. I allowed the misconception to stand. I lived modestly by choice. My wardrobe consisted mostly of vintage garments found at Portland flea markets, many crafted from century-old French Cherokee. My vehicle was a well-maintained, older model Honda Civic, perpetually scented with the comforting blend of old paper and road trip memories. I didn't purchase expensive wine, but I did own a set of Baccarat crystal glasses, rescued from a pawn shop for next to nothing. Each year, I traveled to Europe, ostensibly for sourcing antiques, though in truth I went to wander the museums of Florence, browse dusty bookshops in Bruges, and stroll through rain-glossed Paris streets, where lamplight shimmered on cobblestones like gold. I had nothing to prove to anyone. On Thanksgiving, I arrived at my mother's Portland bungalow around noon, carrying a homemade pumpkin pie and a polished set of antique silver spoons. It was a quiet tradition of mine to bring my brother Daniel a small, historically meaningful gift each year, though he barely acknowledged them before shifting conversation toward court victories or luxury vacations in Aspen. My mother's home looked unchanged. Trim shrubs, fading hydrangeas, and the familiar aroma of sage and roasting turkey greeted me at the door. Daniel's sleek black SUV occupied the driveway, so I parked farther down the block, the autumn leaves crunching softly beneath my boots. "Well, look who's here," Daniel remarked when I entered. "Good thing you didn't keep the gallery open today. Huh, Emily?" I simply smiled. The gallery was indeed open, my newly hired assistant was running it. But Daniel had never understood delegation. In his mind, if you weren't physically present and visibly stressed, you weren't truly working. In the kitchen, my mother handed me a bag of Yukon Gold potatoes. "Can you peel these, sweetheart? Your brother's handling the carving." I took a seat at the kitchen table, quietly peeling potatoes as I did every year. My father entered a moment later, bourbon glass in hand. He beamed at Daniel, hardly acknowledging me. "How's the gallery, Emily?" he asked absently. "Still open. Same as always, Dad," I replied. He turned back to Daniel, immersed in discussion of legal briefs and courtroom strategies, while my mother ladled gravy and smiled proudly. By 3 p.m., we were all gathered around the dining table, bathed in warm light and the rich aromas of Thanksgiving dinner. It felt like any other year, until Daniel said, almost absently, "Where's my phone? Battery must have died." I noticed my phone sitting on the kitchen counter, where I'd left it while rinsing cranberries. Before I could retrieve it, Daniel picked it up, swiped the screen, and scanned my notifications. Seconds later, his expression shifted. His face went pale. Then, in a sharp, incredulous tone that cut through the cozy atmosphere, he said, "What the hell is this, Emily?" The room fell silent. He held my phone aloft, the screen glowing brightly in his hand. A notification from my financial advisor, Ryan, was clearly visible. "Congrats. Your net worth just hit $15,200,000. Let's meet next week to discuss new investments." My father's glass slammed onto the table, splashing bourbon across the cloth. My mother stared at me, stunned. Daniel looked at me as though I'd confessed to a crime. "You've got to be kidding," he said. $15 million? You. That little gallery made all that." I stood and extended my hand. "Give me my phone, Daniel." He pulled it back, eyes narrowed. "No. You're going to explain this. Where did the money come from? Are you laundering funds? Running some shady operation? Because if you are, it affects all of us." "Nothing illegal," I said calmly. "Every dollar is mine, earned from the work you've always dismissed as playing with junk." My father's voice was quieter now, unsteady. Is this true, Emily? You actually have that kind of money? I nodded. The room remained frozen. A moment earlier we were discussing stuffing. Now it felt like a courtroom. Daniel's voice cracked with disbelief. All these years you let us think you were struggling. Mom worried constantly. Dad kept asking if you wanted to teach. And all this time, you've been sitting on millions. My mother whispered as though to herself. She wears old sweaters, gives secondhand books to the kids, drives that old Honda, and she's a millionaire. I took the phone gently from Daniel's hand and returned it to my pocket. No one ever asked, I said. No one really listened when I talked about what I did. I wasn't hiding anything. You just never cared. At least, not unless it was about Daniel. Daniel let out a short, humorless laugh. Well, great. Now we know. We're going to have a lot to talk about after dinner. I looked around the table, at my father's furrowed brow, my mother's clenched hands, Daniel's indignant posture. It was clear that Thanksgiving was far from over. We ate in silence. The turkey had gone cold on our plates. The gravy had thickened into a dull brown paste. No one touched my mother's famous roasted sweet potatoes. Conversation had vanished, replaced by a single figure flashing in everyone's minds. $15,200,000. There were no congratulations, no acknowledgement of the years I had spent building a business from the ground up alone. Only silence, and the quiet churn of mental arithmetic behind carefully measured expressions. Naturally, Daniel broke the silence first. He set down his fork, his voice adopting a tone both gentle and calculated. You know, Emily, he began, Olivia has this opportunity to study art in Paris. It's a once-in-a-lifetime thing. But the tuition, the living costs, it's all considerable. If you helped, it could make all the difference. I met his eyes evenly. You're asking me for money? He didn't flinch. It's not asking, Daniel replied coolly. We're family. You have it. We need it. Call it fair. My father nodded, as though that logic was self-evident. My mother, eyes soft and voice gentler still, added, You live alone. No children. No daycare bills or college funds. Helping your family wouldn't be a burden, would it, sweetheart? Before I could respond, Julia, Daniel's usually reserved wife, stepped in. Her voice, often quiet at gatherings, carried an edge tonight. The truth is, she said, arms folded, you've got millions just sitting there, while Daniel's juggling tuition, a mortgage, and daily expenses. Emily, you wear vintage clothes, drive a Civic, live in a tiny loft. She paused, then added, almost as an accusation, Do you really need all that money? I set down my fork. So, because I choose simplicity, I'm somehow unworthy of what I've earned. Julia gave a dismissive shrug. All I'm saying is, if you're not using it, someone else should. I kept my voice even. What about the years I spent learning? The risks I took? The hours I worked while you all dismissed my passion as a quirky little antique phase? Now, because one notification appears, you feel entitled to a share. Daniel leaned forward, lowering his voice. Do you even understand how much we worried? Mom lost sleep thinking you couldn't afford health insurance. You owe us some transparency. A soft, incredulous laugh escaped me. That's rich. 4 years, none of you cared enough to ask about my work. Not once did Mom or Dad visit my gallery after opening day. Every time I shared a success, I was ignored. And now, suddenly you care. My mother's voice sharpened slightly. We're not pressuring you, sweetheart. We're just suggesting you use your good fortune to support those closest to you. I looked around the table. Their eyes, once familiar, now appraised me like a bank statement. A minute passed, then another. Daniel spoke again, more composed. I'm only asking for Olivia. Maybe a small scholarship fund. You could even put your name on it. One gesture, just one, could change her life. And then what? I asked. Next it's your mortgage, then Dad's roof, then Mom's medical bills. Am I supposed to be a bank now? An ATM with a family name? Julia sighed, her patience thinning. Emily, don't be dramatic. You don't have to give everything. Just maybe $3 million. That still leaves you 12. I turned to my father, who had remained mostly quiet. What do you think, Dad? He wouldn't meet my eyes. Your mother's right. We're not forcing you. But remember, We all thought about helping you when you were struggling. Now it's your turn to give back. I nodded slowly. The hollowness crept in. I hadn't expected applause, but I had, perhaps, hoped for some recognition, some acknowledgement that I had built something from nothing. Instead, I saw only calculation. No one asked what I had learned. No one cared what I wanted. They had added me up, divided the sum, and called it love. I glanced at the clock. Nearly 4 p.m. I pushed my chair back. "Emily," my mother called. "Don't leave in the middle of dinner." I turned to face her. My voice was clear. "I'm not leaving. I'm reclaiming the boundaries this family just tried to cross." I stepped out onto the porch, coatless. Portland's sharp November air bit at my skin, but it felt welcome. Honest. I gripped the railing. My breath fogged in the cold. Inside, the muffled clatter of silverware and whispering voices sounded more like a shareholders' meeting than a holiday meal. I closed my eyes. Let the wind steady me. Let the truth settle. 10 minutes later, I walked back inside. I stood at the threshold of the dining room and spoke calmly. "Before anyone else makes plans for my bank account," I said, "I need to make something very clear." They all turned to look at me, each face a blend of offense and disbelief, as though I were an insubordinate employee daring to challenge the board mid-meeting. "My money didn't come from luck," I said evenly. "No one here was with me when I started. None of you showed up when I was hauling broken furniture out of basements at 6 in the morning or coming home after 12-hour days, hands raw from mildew and splinters. So why now, after all this time, do you think you're entitled to dictate how I use it?" Daniel leaned back in his chair, arms folded. "I'm not saying you didn't work hard, Emily. But if you really love this family, then helping shouldn't feel like such a burden." I gave a thin, measured smile. "I don't lack love, Daniel. I lack mutual respect." My father set his bourbon down again. This time, his hand trembled slightly. "Your mother worried for years," he said quietly. "We had no idea you'd managed to save that much." "That's because none of you wanted to know," I replied. "Any time I tried to share something about my work, someone changed the subject or gave me a pitying smile. You didn't believe I could build anything worth noticing." Julia, now checking her phone, perhaps calculating, spoke in a low, pointed tone. "This isn't about your success, Emily. It's about the secrecy. You kept this hidden from all of us. It feels like a betrayal." I nodded once. Slowly. "If anyone here knows what betrayal feels like, Julia, it's me." Daniel slammed his hand against the table. "Enough. You can't stand there acting righteous while refusing to help your own niece." "I'm not refusing," I said calmly. "Helping happens when someone asks with respect. What's happening here?" I gestured around the table. "This is a demand." "It's a guilt trip dressed up as concern." My mother's voice broke. Her eyes were wet. "You're tearing this family apart over money. You live alone. No husband. No children. What are you going to do with all that for the rest of your life?" Her words sliced more deeply than she likely knew. "I'm going to live it," I said, voice raw. "And if that embarrasses you, then I'll carry that shame alone." Daniel stood abruptly, scraping his chair across the floor. "If you walk out of here without agreeing to help, don't expect things to stay the same. Don't expect invites to birthdays. Don't expect to come to Olivia's graduation." I stared at him. "You're using your child to manipulate me." "This isn't manipulation," he said flatly. "It's consequence." I rose without another word, retrieved my coat from the hook, and slipped it on. My hands trembled, whether from cold or fury, I wasn't sure, but my voice didn't falter. "I'm not saying no because I'm selfish. I'm saying no because I've learned the most expensive lesson of my life. If people only see your worth when they can convert it into money, then they never saw you at all." As I reached the door, my father called after me. "You'll regret this someday. Being alone, it catches up with you." I turned my head just enough. "I still have family," I said. "They're just not in this room." And I stepped out into the fading light of a Portland evening. The air was cold and sharp, cutting straight through my coat, but I welcomed it. It cleared the fog. No more strained dinners. No more side comments wrapped in concern. No more being viewed as the family's oddity until I became their investment opportunity. Only the sound of my boots against the brick sidewalk. Solid, steady, and lighter with each step. When I returned to Hartman and Heritage, I didn't turn on the lights right away. I climbed the stairs to my small loft and sat by the window. From there, I watched Everett Street below, its flickering neon signs casting warm halos, the sound of soft jazz drifting from the cafe across the way. Everything looked the same, but I had changed. My phone buzzed. A text from my mother. "You hurt us, but I still love you." Nothing from Daniel. I wasn't waiting. I silenced my phone, not to run from their voices, but to reclaim space from the noise of guilt and misplaced expectation. The next morning, I opened the gallery early. Not for sales, for clarity. I swept the floors, dusted shelves, polished the glass counters. As I worked, the soft ticking of the antique wall clock filled the space, its rhythm steady, patient, familiar. That afternoon, the bell above the gallery door chimed. My parents stepped inside. They didn't browse. They didn't speak right away. My father accepted a cup of tea. My mother lingered by the brass candlesticks. Finally, my father set down his cup and looked at me, this time, not with disappointment or concern, but something quieter, something almost like humility. "We were wrong to believe that success had to look like Daniel's," he said slowly. "I thought it was safer, easier to explain." "I understand," I replied. "But I need you to understand something too." I never wanted applause. I just wanted to be seen. To be enough. My mother didn't speak. She only nodded, just once, almost imperceptibly. But it was there. At 7 p.m., I walked them to the door. I stood on the porch as their silver sedan pulled away into the night. No tears. No lingering ache. Only this truth. I no longer needed them to become the parents I once wished for. I had spoken. I had stood my ground. And I had refused to let love become currency. Later that evening, I sat alone among the antiques at Hartman and Heritage, in a room where time wasn't discarded, but preserved with reverence. I opened my journal and penned my final thought for the day. For the first time, Thanksgiving wasn't a test. It was simply dinner between 3 people. And I didn't need permission to be myself. Perhaps my family will never understand me, but they no longer have the power to define me. Emily's story is a quiet reminder. True worth isn't measured by praise or pedigree, but by the courage to live with purpose and protect your boundaries. In a world obsessed with titles and degrees, she chose a quieter path and built a life with her own hands. Would you have made the same choice? Share your thoughts below and subscribe for more stories about courage, identity, and choosing your own way home. The next morning, just after 8 a.m., Jasmine arrived, her arms cradling a cappuccino, her brow knit with concern. "I texted you yesterday," she said softly. "Did everything go okay?" I took the warm cup, grateful. "Better than you'd think. Thank you for checking on me." Hiring Jasmine had been one of the best decisions I'd made all year. At 23, she was passionate about antique textiles, enthralled with Victorian embroidery, and blessed with something I had once longed for, a mentor. Now I was the mentor. In the weeks that followed, I poured myself into the gallery. I launched a blog series on American wood furniture, spanning the 18th to early 20th centuries. To my surprise, traffic soared. Collectors began writing in. One even asked to apprentice with me. I hosted monthly talk and tea events, gatherings where neighbors, collectors, and curious students sipped mint tea among the relics of history and traded stories. A Civil War era oak mirror passed through 6 generations. Crystal goblets, once stowed in a Charleston cargo hold. A desk drawer holding a soldier's final letter home. No one asked how much money I had. They asked, "Did this box belong to anyone famous? How can you tell hand-stitching from machine work? What does original shellac smell like?" They saw value, not price tags. One afternoon, as I carefully packed a delicate porcelain vase bound for California, a soft ping echoed from my inbox. It was an email from a museum in Seattle. They were planning a workshop on colonial American furniture and wanted a local expert to lead it. My name had been recommended by a university professor, someone I'd helped authenticate a 19th century dining set for years ago. That was when it struck me. I was no longer living in Daniel's shadow. I had become my own reference point. On a quiet December night, I locked up the gallery and crossed Everett Street to the bakery. Mrs. Marie, the 68-year-old owner, waved me in. We sat by the window, sharing warm apple tart and cinnamon tea as the city moved gently outside. She was the first person to hire me, back when I was just beginning, to appraise antiques for a local fundraiser. The first to say, "You've got eyes that notice what others miss. Don't ever let anyone shut them." I told her, briefly, about Thanksgiving. She didn't press for details. She only said, "Blood isn't always family. Sometimes, family is who you choose." That night, I returned home late. The wind howled through the windows, but I didn't feel cold. I sat by the window and wrote. No one can take away what you build with your own hands. I don't need them. I have myself, and the people who truly see me. January arrived, brisk and bright, full of quiet resolutions. I hung a new sign in the window. Antique Appraisal and Preservation Class. Begins January 14th. Limited to 8 students. Within 3 days, it was full. The roster included a 72-year-old woman with a love for French porcelain, a retired history teacher, 2 interior design students from Lewis and Clark, a chef from Seattle opening a 19th-century themed restaurant. At our first session, we gathered around a long walnut table salvaged from an abandoned church. I didn't stand behind a podium or recite facts. I told stories, hidden carvings beneath Windsor chairs, the scent of original 1920s shellac, a battered sideboard once mistaken for junk, later confirmed to be a rare post-colonial piece. And as I watched their eyes light up, I realized I wasn't just teaching. I was sharing a spark. One Friday afternoon, just after we'd finished a session on Brazilian mahogany, Jasmine approached me with a green envelope tied delicately with ribbon. "Open it," she said, eyes bright with anticipation. Inside was a hand-drawn proposal, complete with sketches and cost estimates. A plan to expand the back of the gallery into a preservation workshop and learning space. I looked at her, stunned. She smiled. "I think we can turn this into something more. Not just a gallery, but a place to teach, to restore, to inspire." I exhaled, deeply, freely. For the first time, I didn't just see my work. I saw its future. "We could host hands-on sessions," Jasmine said, her voice hopeful. "And if you agree, I'd love to help turn this place into a training center for young people." I studied her sketches, carefully drawn, full of ambition, and smiled. "Jasmine, you're dreaming big." She met my gaze without hesitation. Because I learned from someone who dares to dream big. That evening, I called Ryan, my financial advisor. We decided to allocate $250,000 from my investments to launch the Evergreen Fund, a scholarship dedicated to students passionate about heritage conservation and antique design. The only requirement, a real-world project that preserved the past with integrity. By March, we had received 43 applications from 11 states. Our first recipient was Lena Martinez, 27, who had left college when she could no longer afford tuition for woodworking conservation. Her application included photos of handmade joints, gently restored heirlooms, and a letter that stayed with me long after I finished reading it. "I don't want to profit from what's new," she wrote. "I want to preserve the old, so future generations understand how their ancestors lived." When I called to tell her she'd been selected, Lena burst into tears. "You have no idea," she said between sobs. "You just saved me from going back to a convenience store night shift." But I hadn't saved her. I'd simply done what I had once longed for someone to do for me, believed in her when no one else did. By late April, the back of the gallery had transformed into the archive room, a space for community workshops, quiet exhibits, and hands-on preservation classes. Some days, the demand was so high that people waited outside, standing room only. One evening, while restocking shelves, the door chimed. A woman stepped inside, holding a notebook and the familiar nervousness of someone who wasn't sure she belonged. It was Amanda, my cousin, who'd moved to Seattle years ago to teach ecology and timber frame restoration. She hadn't come to a family holiday in over a decade. "I heard about your class through a forum," she said, smiling. "Didn't realize it was you. You're doing something extraordinary." I brewed mint tea and invited her to stay. We sat amid artifacts and talked about a potential collaboration, melding timber preservation with Pacific Northwest ecological history. I used to believe my world was small, 4 walls and dusty antiques. But once I stopped waiting for approval from those who couldn't see me, I found a community that could. I found people who valued what I did, and I found a voice that no longer trembled when it spoke. That November, for the first time in over 15 years, I was the one extending the invitation. A week before Thanksgiving, I called home. My father answered. His voice was slower now, measured. "If you wanted," he said, "you could come to Portland this year. I'll cook. Just the three of us." There was a pause. Then he added quietly, "Your mother would like that. No apologies. No explanations. Just an opening." And for once it was enough. On Thanksgiving Day, I welcomed them into Hartman and Heritage. Mom wore an olive green coat, her silver hair pinned neatly, her lipstick a soft pink. Dad wore sunglasses and a mariner's cap. Inside, Mom moved slowly, touching objects with reverence. Dad wandered through the room, pausing beside a walnut sideboard. "How old is this one?" he asked. "About 1815, I replied. "Pacific Northwest walnut." Hen joined. He nodded, quiet, but softer than before. Upstairs, my loft glowed with warmth, oak cabinets, vintage lighting, and the gentle clink of serving dishes. Dinner was rosemary chicken, mashed potatoes, cranberry sauce, and pecan pie I'd baked that morning. Nothing extravagant, just food made with care. We ate without tension. Dad asked about my classes. Mom shared neighborhood gossip. No one mentioned Daniel. No one mentioned money. After tea, I handed Mom a small white box. "A gift," I said gently. Inside was a silver camellia brooch, late 19th century, elegant and understated. I'd found it at auction, its design matching the emblem I'd chosen for the Evergreen Fund. Mom's hand trembled. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "You know, I always loved camellias." "I remember," I said. "You wore one on parent-teacher night." She blinked, surprised. "You still remember?" "I remember everything. I've learned that living true to yourself often means standing alone. But it's worth every step. If my story resonates with you, share your thoughts below. Have you ever had to defend your dreams, even to family? I'd love to hear how you found your voice. And if you're still searching, remember this. You don't owe anyone your silence. You don't owe them your success. What you build with love, with care, and with conviction is yours. Protect your boundaries. Honor your passion. Keep building the life that reflects who you are. If this journey speaks to you, stay with me. Subscribe, and let's keep proving, together, that quiet strength can change everything.